This is the Saanich Peninsula Ecclesia Study Day in January 2022. And our speaker today is Brother David Stiles. The subject is Sustaining Hope and Joy in a Dark World. And I'm not going to change tabs to look at the first talk, but it's like, how dark is it really? Did I get the right one?
You got it.
Awesome. Well, Brother David. Make sure. There you go.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much, Brother Mark, for the introduction, and very happy to be here. I have to thank Mark and all of you here for accommodating us. Also, I should say Sister Mary is here with me as well. So we're really delighted to be here. We haven't been out here for many, many years, and we've missed all of you. And it's been awesome to be able to catch up with so many during our brief stay. And a big shout out to Brother Dave and Sister Ruth, who are doing an absolute stellar job of looking after us. And we're very appreciative of their kind hospitality and the comfort of their home. So I have to share this. I asked Mark for an accommodation because we were hoping to be in New Zealand next month, and you all very kindly moved the date of your study day, and we of course will not be able to go to New Zealand. So the original date of the study day would have been just fine. But anyway, things being what they are, we all have learned, as Mark said, to pivot and adapt. So thank you for adapting, and as it turned out, we could have come in February, but we're here in January. And we're also very happy to be enjoying the West Coast weather, because tonight there is a cold weather advisory for Ontario. They're expecting wind chills of around -35. So I asked one of the young brethren in the meeting to go check our house and make sure the furnace was on, because that's like, you know, freeze up the place stuff if your furnace kicks off for whatever reason. So enjoying the 6 degrees that you get in the wintertime. It's quite balmy. So, all right, the subject is sustaining hope and joy in a dark world. So what we hope to do over the course of these classes is provide some suggestions, give everyone food for thought. You know, the subject certainly provided me with food for thought. Mary and I have this ongoing debate. She claims I'm a dark Germanic personality. My mother was German. And I kind of revel in all that is, you know, doom and gloom, or in German, there's this expression, Sturm und Drang. It's thunder and lightning. And I guess I'm an old-fashioned romantic from the 1800s. So I don't mind, you know, kind of contemplating all that is dark. And Mary says, oh, it must be a very, you know, dire place to live in your brain. And I say, that's because I'm grounded in reality. And she, on the other hand, thinks, you know, far balmier thoughts. And having grown up on the south coast of England, where everything's lovely and green and wonderful, for Mary, everything's wonderful and green even in the middle of our winter, which I can't, you know, look at the place, it's a frozen wasteland. So, you know, we all have different strategies, you know, and how we cope with our individual darkness. So not one size fits all. And, you know, some strategies you might say, oh yeah, no worries, I've done that all my life. And, you know, others might say, hey, well, you know, thanks for the suggestion. Anyway, so the first class is entitled, How Dark Is It Really? And, you know, I was thinking about, you know, the dark world that we live in. And I thought, you know, this is the irony of it all. The world we live in is created by God. This is God's world. And, you know, we know the story. When Adam and Eve rebelled, God chose to curse it. So in a sense, the darkness that we experience and the challenges and struggles come from God. God himself said, look, if I create good and I create evil. So when we consider the darkness of the world, kind of the very first thing that should mitigate our appreciation under this understanding of it is that it's a world God provided. And, one of our great challenges as Christians and as believers is maybe reconciling that idea that, look, this is the circumstances in which God placed us. And he placed us in these circumstances for a reason. And that can create a lot of, conflict in our minds. In fact, for many, the contemplation that God might be directly or indirectly responsible for the darkness we observe is a reason not to believe in God in the first place. It actually drives people away. And a further mitigation of that is, well, why don't I create an evil God, call him the devil, and attribute all the responsibility to the devil? So at least I relieve God of some of this, this dissonance and conflict I feel in my brain about my God. So, there's been, different approaches, but for myself personally, as a Bible reader and a Christian, I have to accept that this is the world God gave me, and I need to work through it as best I can with the tools God's provided. And God's provided us with all that is necessary. So the first thing I would say to myself is, look, okay, Dave, how dark is it really? Like, kind of get a grip here and start looking at things possibly from a different perspective. And unfortunately, I've always been a great lover of nature. And I thought, well, what's what's an exemplar of, God's, wonderfulness? And the one thing that I kept coming to were birds of paradise. I'm an avid bird watcher. I've been really enjoying the bird feeders that everyone has, which I gave up on years ago because the squirrels just clean them out in a heartbeat. But I love birds. And the thing that I kind of bemoan a bit is I'll probably never have the opportunity to go to Papua New Guinea and observe these birds in real life. So sometimes I have to satisfy myself with pictures. So I thought, I'm going to throw up a few pictures of these birds of paradise. This one's the Wilson's bird of paradise. And I look at that and I think, oh my goodness, is there anything more beautiful than this creature, which, I believe God created? That has to say something about the God we worship, that he would provide us with, such beauty to behold. And, you talk about, modern marvels. In the good old days, the only way you could see a bird like this was as if some intrepid explorer, battled their way through the swamps of New Guinea, shot the thing, stuffed it as quickly as they could, and got it to the British Museum as quickly as they could, so you could, gape at it in kind of a dullish version of its original self. This one's called the Western Paradia. And, but today we have the pleasure of looking at pictures that skilled photographers have taken, and we can marvel at this beauty and think to ourselves, oh my goodness, I just love this stuff. I mean, that's real, man. That's a bird. And there's hundreds of species of these things. These are just a few samples. And, I look at something like that and I'm like, well, wait a minute, there's some pretty cool stuff out there. And, if you're not into birds, maybe you're into sports cars. And I could have done a survey of sports cars. My grandchildren would have loved it. You guys into sports cars? Me? All right, well, I'm not either. But there's a lot of, I like this because God created it, not Chevy or Ford or GM, but I just think, wow, what an amazing testimonial to the light that we can enjoy, and kind of buoy our spirits while we contemplate some severe challenges. Now, the other thing that I thought about was, okay, dark Dave who thinks of dark things. What are things that are good about the world we live in today? And I'll tell you, I got a huge pet peeve. And you can disagree with me all you like, but I find it quite unhelpful to speak in terms of things being far worse than they ever have been before. usually we're reflecting on the moral condition of the world. We say, oh, these things are so much worse than they've ever been before. Look, you don't need to be that big a student of history to appreciate that things have never been anything other than a bit dire when it comes to human behavior. In fact, there are periods in history where things have been considerably worse when it comes to the moral comportment of human beings. Much worse. In fact, the Bible tells us so because the state of the world was so dire, so violent, and so immoral that God saw fit to take everyone out except a family of 8. That's how bad things were. So I think it's so important, and so much of this exercise and so much of this deliberation is about our state of mind and what we do and say within ourselves to get us to either a good place or a bad place. And I think one kind of unhelpful mantra is to keep saying that things are worse than they've ever been. It simply isn't the case. Human behavior and human morality is a constant in the human experience, okay? So when you look at what happened between Cain and Abel, was there any, reason Cain did what he did other than exercising, the evil that resides in all of us? Was there any precedent? Was there any bad example? Not that we know of. Cain, in a fit of selfishness and envy and jealousy and anger, murdered his brother. And that happened shortly after they departed Eden. That outrageous act of violence and hate occurred, whatever chronology you want to subscribe to, let's say 6,000 years ago. And that's described the human condition ever since. I don't know how much worse it gets than you murdering your own brother. And yet that's what happened right off the hop. So Noah and Ezra, let that be a lesson to you. Don't ever murder your brother. Very bad. And that applies to Levi as well. So I think it's very helpful and important to not speak in those terms and to accept the fact that, that's been the human condition. So I put up a list of things that I thought were changes for the better that in the last 100 years have been really improved, quite markedly. And, this is not an exhaustive list. Some of you might have other ideas or know more about this than I do, and I accept that fully and completely. But one of the things that seems to have improved considerably over the past 100 years is access to water and power. According to the stats I looked at, between 1980 and 2017, access to potable water increased from 58% to 91%. So in other words, 91% of the world's population has access to drinkable water. Anytime you read some dire newspaper article about how everyone's drinking sewage, actually look at what, statistically is the case. It's muchly improved. When it comes to access to power, apparently as of 2014, 85% of the planet, the inhabited planet, has access to some form of power. That's a huge number, that many people on the planet can access power to that extent. One thing that gets talked about a lot is, food supply. And I have been reading this from the time I could walk and talk. Now, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I was born in Texas, grew up in the Detroit area, spent most of my life in Southern Ontario. We live out in the country. I'm a huge gardener. I love growing food naturally. I'm not an organic gardener, but I do grow things as naturally as I can. And for some reason, from a very early age, I was like an environmental warrior. I absolutely loved nature, loved animals, still do, was determined I was going to be a zoologist. I was going to, research and, I had all kinds of aspirations to do good for, animals. I wanted to help animals. I guess I could have become a vet instead of a dentist, but anyway, at least I help people's teeth. So I was, absolutely kind of obsessed with all of it. In fact, it created a lot of conflict in my home because my dad, being a hard-headed businessman, felt very differently about environmental issues than I did. And we had this beautiful 5-acre property outside of Detroit, and it was heavily treed, and it was lush and green. And one day my dad wanted to trim all the trees. He wanted to cut down all the low-hanging branches. And I thought, this was an outrage. How could he cut anything off a living creature? This was an amputation. This was, this was an affront and a sin. And I was determined to thwart him. And I hid every cutting tool I could find in the house. Of course, the reason he wanted to cut down the low-hanging branches is that when my brothers cut the lawn and they had taken over that job from me, the low-hanging branches hit them in the face and were threatening to take out their eyes. Of course, I was far more concerned about the well-being of the tree than I was about my brother's eyes or their face or anything else about them. So in the end, of course, my dad won and found the saws and hatchets that I had hid and trimmed the trees. Quite heartbreaking. But along with my obsession about environmental issues was this constant din of food insufficiency, that as a planet we were going to run out of food. And this started way back. Well, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Malthus. He was Malthusian economics, that there's exponential growth of population, arithmetic growth of food supply, and we were going to very quickly outstrip the planet's capacity to produce food. All turned out to be bunk. In actual fact, the ability to produce food increased to a greater degree than the human population did. And today, many sectors of food production produce an excess. And I don't know if you read farming magazines, but one big challenge for the dairy industry is there's a worldwide excess of dairy, because the technology associated with milk production is so sophisticated, and the breeding has been so incredible that they're just absolute oceans of milk to be had, and of course all the related products attached to milk. So that's in the agricultural sector has proven to be a greater concern than not being able to produce enough. So in today's terms, they had to quit talking about food insufficiency, because there, as it turned out, plenty of food. What they talk about now is food insecurity. And interestingly enough, what food insecurity is brought about by man-made crisis and catastrophes. So even though we might read on occasion, for example, right now there's a drought in Kenya and it's creating real hardship for Kenyan farmers, there is ample supply of food to tide them over until their rains return and they can feed themselves. So it's an example, and this continues to be the case. And even though they talk about increasing world population, the capacity of the planet to produce food is at the moment apparently limitless. We have that capacity. And that's a good thing. And then I mentioned my own background in environmental issues. Give you this little stat from 1962 to 2017. In 1962, there were about 9,200 acres of protected reserves, or not 9,200 acres, 9,200 protected reserves. As of 2017, there's 200,000. So, whatever we say about the state of the planet and the state of humanity and the state of mankind, there are some things when we set our mind to it, we accomplish and we do it well. And that's collectively. As a species, we can respond intelligently and with resolve to address a problem. And that's one of the ones that have been addressed. Not completely, not uniformly, but certainly the state of the environment and environmental awareness is vastly better than it's ever been before. I give you a little example. As North Americans, right? Prior to the arrival of Europeans, what was there 60 million of wandering up and down the continent? Buffalo. 60 million, North American bison moved up and down the continent from kind of northern Canada right down into Mexico. Just a vast reserve. And that was just one species. So as soon as we know, the Europeans came in, absolutely wiped them out. No one gave it a thought. Wow, they're just there for us to use. And then when they were down to a few hundred, somebody woke up and said, oh my goodness, we went from 60 million to 60. How did that happen? And yet over the last 100 years, the bison has rebounded and for not in danger of extinction. And there's efforts underway to recreate a huge prairie reserve stretching from North Dakota into, I don't know, what is it, Saskatchewan at that point, or Manitoba. But it's like, there's actually a desire to recreate what at one point we destroyed, which I think is commendable. So another issue is disease prevention. And that, can't think of a hotter topic than that. But historically, diseases ravaged humanity in a way that was devastating. And, if we know history and we know the course of events, the Black Plague was just one example of numerous instances of infectious diseases obliterating whole communities. That no longer happens. Even despite this current situation, we are not looking at the wholesale loss of population on this planet. Certain diseases have been completely eliminated, like smallpox. Polio is almost eliminated, and they're constantly working on new and improved treatments for endemic diseases like malaria, which claims hundreds of thousands of lives, and a host of other things. So the ability for us to turn our attention and improve people's lot in this respect is really quite amazing. Never mind the development of new and improved antibiotics and medications of all sorts. Another issue is literacy. Since 1800, literacy has increased by 85%. That's a huge jump. People all over the world are enjoying education in a way they never have before. And interestingly, one of the benefits of the pandemic has been to increase internet access and remote learning. So people who might not have had opportunity beforehand have opportunity now. So that's a fantastic thing. Another issue that is very current is efforts to redress historic wrongs and abuses. Now, some of us might feel that sometimes these things become excessive or oppressive, or we're kind of caught in this loop of apologizing for things that personally I didn't have anything to do with. But nonetheless, the fact that society in general recognizes that bad things happened historically and ought not to happen again is a good thing. Not a bad thing, that's a good thing. And it's an appropriate and right thing to do. So we recognize that it's very often misdirected or incomplete or insufficient. The fact that someone actually thinks that they want to do that is a good thing. And just a few other things, the speed and safety of transportation, access to knowledge, information, and communication, advances in medical treatment, speed of innovation, cure rates. Another issue that is very current is sensitivity to mental health issues and challenges. An entire field of treatment has improved over the past few decades in an unparalleled fashion. And what was once, dismissed as misbehavior or annoying, traits, or relegated to institutions that were, medieval in the way they treated people. The whole issue of, providing support and providing resources and providing appropriate treatment for mental disease that is every bit as much a disease process as a physical disease has been absolutely amazing, and one that Mary is involved with on a regular basis because she's a mental health therapist. So you have any problems whatsoever, Mary will happily talk to you about. Don't talk to me. And then one that I thought was pretty amazing, and Mary reminded me of this, is the increase in Bible literacy. And this is very counterintuitive because, I don't know what your news feed is like, but in my news feed, every now and then an article pops up about diminished church attendance, and that certain traditional churches are on the verge of kind of dropping below a functional membership level. So, one example, well, in Canada, it's the Anglican Church, the Methodist Church, the United Church, are all closing churches at a breathtaking rate. And, you would, if you stopped at that, at that point, you'd think, oh my goodness, look what's going on. Christianity's dying, church attendance is dying, interest in the Bible is dying. In actual fact, quite the opposite is happening. This particular stat, the YouVersion Bible app, has been downloaded over 100 million times. And they reckon that the Bible itself continues to be the biggest bestseller in history. And, people are actually improving their Bible literacy in ways that we really can't tabulate, because so much of this stuff, happens in the privacy of their homes and, on their devices. But, when you look at certain metrics we can measure, there seems to be an enormous interest in the Bible. And I'll tell you a little something, which is kind of funny. Remember that movie, Noah? Who made that movie? It wasn't Mel Gibson. Anyway, remember that it was made the big screen. Anyone to go see it? Go see it. Anyway, we made it a CYC outing several years ago. We thought, let's go see Noah, see what it's all about. And anyway, it was really almost ridiculous. It was, quite a fanciful take. Some of it was legit, some of it was a bit out there. Anyway, I did think it was rather interesting that when they got all the animals on the ark, they all went to sleep for a year, which I thought, that's possibly, maybe. Anyway, we kind of walked out. We were all kind of laughing a little bit about the content of the movie. And one of the CYC members said, oh, that's great. We brought so many people to this movie. We funded Noah too. And fortunately, they never came out with Noah too. But apparently, after that movie, the uploads of this app increased dramatically. And apparently, all kinds of people were compelled to read the biblical version of the story after seeing the movie. Who knew? I thought that was kind of cool. At any rate, so, changes for the better. There are things getting better, and it's okay to say that. We're not diminishing God's warnings about, the return of Christ by saying, yeah, I'm happy to, the good old days. And then when you find out what the good old days were like, you're like, no, I'll take 2022. So having said that, some problems are intractable. And I think these are the ones we tend to focus on, tend to talk about a lot. What do they say? Bad news travels fast. If you hear some bad news, you tell 20 people. If you hear good news, you tell 5. I just made that up, but I think I'm roughly right. So that's, but that does tend to dominate our conversation, unfortunately. Oh, hey, one more environmental thing I have to share because I love this stuff. Thanks to ban on whaling, whale populations have rebounded dramatically. Is everyone aware of that? Whale populations are just exploding. And interestingly enough, because some of the waters around Antarctica are warming, krill populations are increasing explosively. And humpback whales are now breeding annually instead of every other year. And apparently, along with the rebounding whale population, there's a lot more whale poop in the water. Now, that might sound gross, but that's a good thing. Because whale poop is rich in iron, and it's rich in a organically accessible version of iron. I probably didn't say that right. But the point is that whales in their poop provide iron that is more readily accessible to phytoplankton and other forms of microscopic life in the ocean. And that microscopic life feeds the krill. So it will produce this incredible positive feedback loop of, increasing krill population will feed increasing whale populations. And I thought that was so cool.
Also, carbon capture. So
That-
the one whale will capture the equivalent of like 20,000 trees worth of carbon.
in their bodies.
Yeah.
All right, Duncan Kenzie just shared the fact that one whale captures the equivalent amount of carbon to 20,000 trees. So that's pretty crazy. Anyway, I just had to share that. I love whales, they're so cool. All right, some intractable problems. You probably read all of these, so I can move on. Anyway, what we certainly recognize that international politics and competition continue to plague the humanity and nations, and we see that unfolding all the time, and it does not appear to be going away anytime soon. It is what I would describe as an intractable problem. There is also irreconcilable philosophies in religion. Now, I thought about this recently, and I said, Dave, all your life, you've believed that you know the truth, that you know Bible truth, from the earliest moment of consciousness. This is what I know the truth, we're going to teach you the truth, this is the truth, and you know. And as a result, Dave, you need to, preach the truth, you need to share it, get out there and, convert as many people as you can. And, you go. And I, tried to execute that commission as best I could, certainly not as effectively as others have. But I had this, idea that, hey, I can, I need to make a difference and change people's lives. That's great. And, what you believe, Dave, is essentially irreconcilable with anything else around you. You were that. That's how this rolls. And then as time went on, I began to realize, wait a minute, there's not very many of us here that apparently believe the truth. In fact, we're like statistically non-existent. Realize that? Christadelphians are statistically non-existent. If you did, a survey of world religions. So okay, that's great. And then the other thing that you kind of the brick wall I hit was actually not that many people listen to me or are particularly moved by my arguments. Now, I'm not particularly grandiloquent and I probably don't express myself very well, but I thought, well, if I got the truth on my side, surely that will carry the day. It didn't. And, you kind of get left hanging there like, man, I've expended a lot of energy and I have made a lot of people very annoyed. And I was, every Bible class I joined at university, I got kicked out of because as soon as I expressed something remotely anti-Trinitarian, I was told to leave. And I'm like, I'm not moving the dial here. And like zero. And, I thought, wow, that stinks. What am I doing wrong? And then I realized, you take a step back and you look at the world, that's what characterizes our current condition. We, as a species, are intensely tribal, and we live in camps, and that's where we stay, and we surround ourselves with people who feel, and quite often look exactly as we do, and that's our comfort zone, and that's everyone. In fact, everyone is quite often in a more extreme place than I was, even though I felt I had the truth. They might not have said to themselves, I have the truth, but they were so content and happy with their state and their position and their affiliations that they were, unmovable. Because they were in their place, and that's where they wanted to stay. And, I thought, wow, how do I negotiate that circumstance? And I realized that those were things that only God and Jesus Christ were going to be able to address when they return. This was an intractable problem that plagued the human condition and always has. So why is it that God said to Cain, why didn't God just kill Cain? Like, you killed your brother, I'm going to kill you. Because God knew that that's where we were all going to go anyway. So he said, okay, goodbye, Cain. You go do your thing. And Cain did. Cain created his tribe, built his city, did his thing. And that's where he stayed. And he sure knew that God existed. There was no doubt in Cain's mind that God existed. But he wanted to live in this camp. And God let him do it. Because that's what we were going to do anyway. That's what we do anyway. And, it's a sad commentary on the human condition, but nonetheless one that exists. And I believe, are going to need the intervention of Jesus Christ to fix it. Another thing that seems pervasive, persistent, and universal is the uneven accumulation of wealth. Now, you're like, Dave, you're some kind of communist. Well, no, I'm not. I'm a capitalist. So, actually, I even shouldn't say that. That's not right. My mother was a capitalist, and she made me be one too. No, there's a kind of an ongoing family joke, even though we're apolitical. My mother's a dyed-in-the-wool Texan Republican, which she's dead now. It was just a little tongue-in-cheek, but she was one of these, what can I say, a bit conservative in her outlook on things, but nonetheless a very loving and inclusive person at a different level. So anyway, the point is, when you look at the biblical priorities and a biblical agenda, God built things into the law to specifically discourage the uneven accumulation of wealth. That's what the year Jubilee was. It was a redistribution of wealth. There was, certain things in place that would provide for people dropping into dire poverty. So, for example, the Levirate law, where you married your brother's widow, it was designed to prevent an impoverished widow from languishing in the land. And clearly, they weren't doing a very good job of it, because the prophets frequently had to address the fact that they ignored the plight of the widow. And if they were doing what the law said and marrying her, she wouldn't have been in that position in the first place. So, the Bible actually addressed that and flagged it as a social ill. And what we see today is that social ill magnifying, not getting better. So that, in my opinion, is an intractable problem. The other, a couple more, is the plague of substance use and abuse in the international drug trade. That somebody said, the war on drugs that got lost, was lost 50 years ago. So, because of our, weakness and penchant to use and abuse substances, we fund a, kind of one of the most horrible and nightmarish situations on the planet. And that is, the movement of illicit drugs and the social ills that creates. And I think we're all keenly aware of that and recognize it as a problem. And, however much education and money you throw at it, you're still dealing with this pervasive human weakness and susceptibility to use these substances. And then, another one I came up with was incurable diseases. Some diseases we can't cure. We simply won't be able to fix. And I won't get into a long list of those, but nonetheless, they're there, and something needs to be done about them. Okay, what do? What's our response as a Bible-believing and Bible-reading Christian? And this is probably one of my favoriteest verses in the Bible. I quote it a lot, and it speaks to me personally about what is my best response to the challenges I see around us. And this was Joshua's advice to the Israelites, or God's advice through Joshua to Israel: be strong and courageous. So be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Now, I think what is quite compelling about this scripture is that it's simplicity. Be strong, be courageous, don't be afraid. And I read this verse and I think, come on, God, what am I, 5 years old and a scaredy cat? Monster under the bed guy, which I did believe in. And why? I'm an adult now. I'm a man. I don't need to be told to be not afraid, strong and courageous. I am. But actually, we aren't. We are fearful creatures. We tend to be afraid. And we don't tend to be strong. We don't tend to be courageous. We think we will be under circumstances, and maybe we would, but these are traits and characteristics that need to be a part of us all the time. Now, does that mean we'll never be afraid? No. But in an overarching sort of way, ultimately, when we are confronted by things that might otherwise make us fearful and discouraged and full of despair, the instruction from the Bible is to be strong and courageous and don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's okay. And, in many respects, it's like, what did Jesus say? You got to come to God with a childlike spirit. So children do get afraid. And, God is as our Father and Jesus is our friend to say, no, don't be afraid. It's okay. I have got this. And it's a part of that process where we, empty ourselves of ourselves and adopt a more childlike attitude. And Deuteronomy 31, verse 8, the Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Now, it's just such a simple admonition. And, we've all read these verses over and over again, but I know what I do. I just do the reading, zip by it again. And then, when you kind of get confronted with a situation that is fear-inducing or discouraging or potentially going to fill us with despair, it's like, wait a minute. What did God just say to me? He'll never leave. He won't forsake. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. Now, we're all going to think of examples of where we think God did leave us or did forsake us, and we're going to talk about that in the next class. But for the moment, I think that that's a powerful and simple admonition. Isaiah 43, 1-3. But now this is what the Lord says. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by my name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Don't be afraid. That's, and I don't think I'm being asked to do anything dramatic or heroic. God is saying, look, just don't sit there and tremble your life away. And again, 1 Corinthians 16, 13-14, Paul's advice to the Corinthians, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be courageous, be strong, do everything in love. And some of you might be aware that that's actually a quote from 1 Samuel 4:9, be men and fight. Now, who said that? Who said be men and fight? The Philistines did. They said it when they heard the ark was in the camp of Israel. And they said, quit you like men, you Philistines. And the irony was that the state of Israel was so deplorable, God's support switched from Israel to the Philistines in that particular moment. And they had to summon courage to take the day in that particular instance. So probably one of the most ironic quotes in the Bible that Paul would quote what the Philistines said in response to the faithless nation of Israel, which is, those kinds of, juxtapositions I think are very instructive. I'm not going to talk about it at the moment, but nonetheless, that's where the quote came from. And Paul quotes it and encourages the Corinthians to be strong and courageous. Actually, one of the explanations is that one of the things the Corinthian ecclesia had to do was cope with Judaizers who were trying to bring them back to law. So there was a parable in the sense that these first century Jews who were determined to return Christians to the law were in some respects parallel to the apostate Israelites who were bringing the ark into battle. Well, that was Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's two somewhat worthless sons. So those in response to any perceived darkness, any challenges to our faith personally or collectively, situations that might appear intractable or without solution, I think the Bible gives us a simple response to it all, and that is don't be overwhelmed with fear and discouragement. Stand strong in your faith and rely on God. Now, you know, I know that, you know, as soon as those words come out of my mouth, there's a certain sense in which, oh, Dave, you know, don't say that to me. Don't, you know, I got a lot going on. I got serious challenges. I sometimes feel quite overwhelmed. Don't just tell me to stand there and be strong and courageous, man. I'm not right now, and that's okay. And in the next class, we're going to look at that a little bit. How do we reconcile, you know, what appears to be simplistic advice with the realities of our current circumstance? But nonetheless, I do think it's significant that when we do look at the Bible, we are encouraged to be courageous, not afraid, and stand firm when confronted with this perceived darkness that's all around us. So I'll leave it at that. I guess we get a short break and pick it up from there. And hi, everybody in cyberspace. I meant to say hi, saying hi now.